There were 41 people in the server room hallway when it happened. 41 employees of Calder Systems, engineers, analysts, 2 assistant vice presidents, and every single one of them watched the janitor get escorted to the elevator by a woman in a blazer who had been CEO for exactly 11 months. In his left hand, he held a mop. In his right hand, pressed against his chest, he held a stuffed orange fox named Wren. His daughter had left it in his cart that morning when he dropped her off at the ground floor daycare, and she'd pressed it into his hands and said, "Keep it safe, Daddy." He'd been doing exactly that for 6 hours. The CEO's name was Serena Voss. She did not look at the stuffed animal. She looked at the mop cart and the man holding it, and she said the words that would define the next 14 days of her professional life. She said, "You are wasting company time on a company server." Then the elevator opened. Then Marcus Webb stepped inside. "Stay with this one. It earns it." Marcus Webb was 32 years old. He had calloused hands and a faded uniform shirt that said Calder Facilities in letters that had been washed too many times. His boots were steel-toed, and one of the laces had been knotted twice because it had snapped 3 months ago and he hadn't replaced it yet. He was not supposed to be in the server bay hallway. The server bay hallway was on the 7th floor, which was technically a restricted access zone for facilities staff, and Marcus knew that. He had gone up there anyway, quietly, twice a week, for 4 months. His daughter's name was Cora. She was 6 years old. She carried Wren the fox with her every morning when Marcus walked her to the small daycare room on the building's ground floor, and every afternoon when he picked her up, Wren was under her arm, slightly more wrinkled than the morning. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of going still when she was thinking hard about something. Marcus noticed that habit every time it happened. It made whatever room they were in feel important. Her mother's name had been Dana. Dana had died 2 years and 3 months ago from a brain hemorrhage that came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had not talked about that to anyone at Calder Systems. There was nothing to say. The grief had settled into him not like a wound, but like weather. The kind that is always present in some form, that you stop expecting to leave. He had taken the janitor position 8 months ago. Before that, he had spent 4 years doing something else entirely, in a place he did not discuss, in a capacity that no one at Calder had thought to ask about. He had a degree from a school he never mentioned, and a clearance level that had expired but still had been real. He had once spent 11 days in a server infrastructure that was the operational backbone of a facility he still could not name, diagnosing a fault that 3 other engineers had classified as a hardware failure. It was not a hardware failure. He had not explained what it was afterward. He had fixed it. He did not volunteer any of this to anyone at Calder Systems. He mopped floors. He collected waste bins. He maintained the cart with the broken lace on the left wheel that he kept meaning to replace. Serena Voss had been promoted to CEO 11 months ago after the previous CEO stepped down in the middle of a board restructuring. She was 31. Finance background. A reputation for precision. She had spent 11 months trying to prove to a board of mostly older men that she was not a temporary solution. She made fast decisions. She did not always have time to ask what she did not know. The hidden manipulator was a man named Cameron Druce. He was 47, silver-haired, wore a watch that cost more than Marcus made in a year, and had been Calder Systems' chief infrastructure officer for 6 years. He was very good at managing the appearance of problems rather than the problems themselves. He had been doing that for 4 months with the server farm, and he had been doing it successfully until the servers started failing. The first failure was small. A processing cluster on the 7th floor began running hot in February. Cameron told Serena it was a firmware issue and that his team was handling it. His team was handling it the way men who fear blame handle things, circling the problem, generating reports, appearing busy. The temperature readings kept climbing. In March, 2 redundancy nodes dropped offline. Cameron told Serena it was scheduled maintenance. It was not. Marcus first noticed the heat signature from the server bay ventilation shaft on a Tuesday in early March while mopping the 7th floor corridor. The air from the vent was noticeably warmer than it should have been. He did not say anything. He stood with his mop and noticed what he noticed and then continued mopping. He came back the next day with a small notepad he kept in his cart for inventory logs. He wrote down the temperature reading from the sensor panel near the vent. 31 degrees Celsius in a space rated for 22. He wrote the time. He wrote the date. He went downstairs and finished his shift and picked up Cora, and she pressed Ren the fox into his hands in the elevator and said the fox missed him, and he said he'd missed the fox too. He kept going back, twice a week. He kept writing numbers. By the end of March, the pattern was clear. The heat was concentrated in two specific rack clusters on the northeast corner, racks 7-N4 and 7-N5. The failures were not random hardware deterioration. They were the product of a cooling misconfiguration introduced at the firmware level and not corrected. Whoever had last updated the firmware on those racks had made an error. A specific, traceable error. The kind that compounds until the hardware fails permanently. Marcus had written 11 pages of notes by the time Cameron Druce decided to accelerate the timeline. The board had set a deadline. April 15th. By then, Calder Systems needed to demonstrate that its server infrastructure was stable enough to support a new client contract worth $31 million. The client was a logistics company called Vantara, whose technical team had an audit slot on April 17th. If Calder's servers failed that audit, the contract was void. Cameron knew the servers were not stable. He had known for 6 weeks. He had not told Serena. What he had done was authorize an emergency vendor contract with a third-party firm called Pelham Technical Solutions. Pelham had sent engineers. They had spent 3 weeks on the 7th floor and had not fixed the problem. They had generated a 42-page report in language dense enough that Serena had relied on Cameron to summarize it. Cameron's summary was that the situation was under control. It was not under control. On April 9th, 2 more nodes failed. The 7th floor temperature hit 38 degrees. An automated alert fired. To Cameron's inbox only, because he had configured the routing 18 months ago and never updated it to include Serena. Marcus was on the 5th floor when the alert fired. He didn't know about the alert. He knew about the temperature because 2 days prior his notepad had said 36 degrees, and he had known then that the window was closing. He went upstairs that afternoon. Not to mop. His rotation was finished. He brought Ren. Cora had left the fox in his cart that morning with a small sticky note that said for luck. He kept it in the side pocket. He did not think about luck. He thought about rack 7-N4 and the thermal log timestamps he'd tracked for 6 weeks. He was in the hallway, 40 feet from the server bay entrance, cross-referencing his notepad with the sensor panel, when Serena Voss came off the elevator with Cameron Druce and one of the assistant vice presidents. She saw the mop cart first. Then she saw Marcus, standing at the sensor panel with a small notepad. Ren the fox visible in the cart's side pocket. Cameron said something near her ear. She looked at the sensor panel. She looked at Marcus. She asked what he was doing. He said he was checking the temperature log. She asked why. He said because the numbers were wrong. Cameron said, with the smooth patience of a man who had rehearsed this, that facilities staff did not have technical clearance to interpret server environment data. Serena asked to see the notepad. He held it out. She took it, looked at one page, handed it back. She said she couldn't read his notation. She said this was a restricted floor for facilities personnel. She said she understood he meant well. She said she needed him to take his cart downstairs. She said, "You are wasting company time on a company server. Not malice. Not cruelty." 11 months of pressure and a man with calloused hands standing in a restricted hallway she needed cleared so she could walk in and be briefed by the man who had been lying to her for 6 weeks. Marcus did not argue. He capped his pen. He put the notepad in his pocket. He took Ren from the cart's side pocket and held the fox against his chest. He pushed the cart to the elevator. He went downstairs. The next morning he picked Cora up from the kitchen table where she'd been drawing, a picture of a fox, orange crayon with a crown, and he tied her shoes and she held Ren against her chin while he did the laces, the way she always did. The fox's one glass eye, the left one, caught the kitchen light and made it look like Ren was watching him. She said, "The fox says you're sad." He said he was fine. She said, "The fox knows." He said he knew the fox knew. She pushed the drawing across the table toward him. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket without looking at it again, because if he looked at it again, he would not be able to stop looking at it. He dropped her at daycare. He sat in the facilities room for 4 minutes. Then he opened his locker and took out the notepad. He had made a decision the night before. Not an emotional one. A practical one, the way decisions feel when you have spent years making them in conditions where emotion was a liability. The server farm was going to fail. He knew exactly why. He had 11 pages of evidence. The board deadline was in 6 days. The client audit was in 8. He went to the 8th floor, executive offices, which he cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday. It was Thursday. The executive assistant was a woman named Grace, 53 years old, 19 years at Calder. She had the institutional memory of someone who had outlasted 4 CEOs and remembered what each of them had gotten wrong. She was precise, and she was quiet, and she noticed things. She had noticed Marcus for weeks. The way he always came back to the 7th floor, the notepad, the careful, unhurried attention he gave to the sensor panel. She had not said anything because no one had asked her anything. Nobody ever asked Grace what she had noticed. This was a significant error that several people in the building had been making for 19 years. She was at her desk when Marcus came in with his cart that Thursday morning. He said good morning. She said good morning. He cleaned around the edges of the room. Then he stopped near her desk and asked quietly if there was a way to leave something on Serena Voss's desk without going through Cameron Druce. Grace looked at him, not with surprise, with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for that exact question. She said she could leave a note on the CEO's personal morning stack, everything read before speaking to anyone. She said she needed to know what the note said. Marcus tore a page from the back of his notepad. He wrote 9 lines, the rack numbers, the firmware build version he suspected, the date of first anomalous reading and the projected date of critical failure. The name Pelham Technical Solutions underlined, his name at the bottom, his number, nothing else. Grace read the 9 lines. She looked at Marcus. She did not ask how a janitor knew about firmware build versions. She placed the page face down on the personal morning stack. Serena Voss read it at 7:41 the next morning, before she had spoken to Cameron, before she had opened her laptop. She read it twice. She called Grace. Grace told her who had left it. At 8 o'clock, Serena was on the 7th floor with 2 engineers from a separate infrastructure division, not Cameron's team, and a printed copy of the firmware build logs she had requested through IT at 7:53 without Cameron's knowledge. The engineers pulled the rack 7-N4 configuration file. They found the firmware build version Marcus had written. They cross-referenced the changelog. The error was there, exactly where the 9 lines said it would be. A single misconfigured cooling allocation parameter introduced in a firmware patch 8 weeks ago, authorized through Cameron Druce's approval chain. It took the engineers 40 minutes to identify the full scope, 22 more minutes to begin the correction sequence. The temperature in 7-N4 dropped 4 degrees in the first hour. The redundancy nodes came back online. By noon, the server farm was running within safe parameters for the first time in 8 weeks. Cameron Druce arrived on the 7th floor at 8:45. He walked in with the controlled composure of a man who had maintained an appearance of competence long enough to believe in it. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who reframed. He started explaining that the Pelham team had made significant progress overnight and that the temperature readings were stabilizing as a result of the interventions his team had designed. He used the word interventions. He used the word trajectory. He looked at Serena and did not look at the engineers. Serena showed him the changelog. She showed him the approval chain. She showed him the firmware patch date. She showed him his signature in the authorization field. He looked at the document for a long moment. She watched him look at it. He said it was possible there had been a miscommunication within his team. He said the patch had been flagged as routine. She said the patch had not been flagged as routine. It had been flagged as urgent and had been approved personally by him at 4:47 in the afternoon on the date listed. And the patch had introduced the exact error that had been degrading the server farm for 8 weeks, and the Pelham team had been brought in after that error was introduced, not before, and their 42-page report did not once mention the firmware configuration because they had not been authorized to examine the firmware layer, which was the only layer that mattered. He went quiet. Not the quiet of nothing happening. The quiet of a room where the last thing that needed to be said had already been said. Grace had kept a copy of Marcus's note. She had also kept, because she was Grace and she had been at Calder Systems for 19 years, the original access log from the firmware update terminal showing who had authorized the patch and when. She brought it to the server bay at 9:15 and placed it on the table without a word. Cameron Druce was asked to remain in the building while legal reviewed the documentation. He was escorted to a third-floor conference room. The assistant vice president who walked beside him, the same one who had been in the hallway the day Marcus was sent downstairs, said nothing to him the entire way. Marcus was on the fourth floor when Serena found him, mopping the hallway near the stairwell, Ren in the cart's side pocket. Serena came around the corner alone. She said his name. He stopped. She said she needed him to come with her. He asked if he should leave the cart. She said he could bring it. They went up. The server bay was quiet and cool the way it was supposed to be. She stopped near the sensor panel. She said she had looked into his background. She'd used a specific clearance contact because standard HR searches didn't surface what she was looking for. He said nothing. She said she knew what he'd done before Calder. He said nothing to that either. She said she wanted him to understand what she was about to tell him. She said she had sent him downstairs because she had trusted someone she should have verified, and she had not asked the question she should have asked when a man was standing in a restricted hallway cross-referencing sensor data in his own time. She said she had chosen the explanation that required the least disruption to her existing understanding of the situation. She said, "I was wrong because I did not ask what I did not know, and that is not good enough." He said he appreciated that. She said she wanted to offer him a position, not facilities, senior infrastructure oversight. She said Cameron's team needed restructuring and she needed someone with real technical credibility to lead it. She said he could name his conditions. He was quiet. He said he had one condition that mattered. She said, "Go ahead." He said his daughter was in daycare until 5:30 and he would not take a position that required him to be unavailable at 5:30. She said that was not a condition she would have any difficulty honoring. He said he wanted the terms in writing. She said Grace would draft them tonight. He put his hand back on the mop handle. She was still standing there. He asked if there was something else. She said she wanted to apologize to Cora. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. They took the elevator down. The daycare room was at the end of the ground floor hallway, small, glass-walled, drawings taped to the windows. Cora was at one of the low tables with 3 other children. Ren was on the table beside her, the fox's plastic eyes level with the tabletop. She saw Marcus through the glass first. Then she saw the woman beside him. She looked at Ren. Then she looked at Serena. They went inside. Marcus crouched next to Cora and said there was someone who wanted to say something to her. Serena Voss crouched, fully, without the kind of half-crouch that preserves dignity, down to the height of a 6-year-old. She said her name was Serena. She said she had not been kind to Cora's dad yesterday, and she was sorry. She said Cora's dad was very good at his job. Better than she had understood. Cora looked at Ren. She looked at Serena. She picked up the fox and held it out. She said, "Ren already forgave you. He told me this morning." The daycare worker near the window looked at the floor. Serena Voss did not move for a moment. Then she said thank you, and she meant both the child and the fox, and somehow both meanings were the same meaning. Marcus walked home that evening with Cora's hand in his left hand and Ren under her right arm. The contract terms were being drafted upstairs. The server farm was stable. Cameron Druce was in a third-floor conference room with 2 members of legal and a document that had his name on it in the wrong place. Cora asked if they were having pancakes. He said yes. She said Ren wanted maple syrup and no butter. He said he'd tell the chef. She said he was the chef. He said then he already knew. The sidewalk was uneven near the crossing, and he held her hand tighter where the concrete buckled, the same way he always did. Ren dangled from her hand, the fox's worn orange ears catching the last of the light. He did not think about the title on the contract being drafted upstairs. He thought about whether he had enough eggs. He thought about the drawing in his breast pocket, orange crayon, fox with a crown.